Hello and welcome everybody for a new episode of Career and Spirituality Conversations. So if you're a first listener, I'm Julie Pone, your host. I support spiritual seekers having a career experience to reconcile what they do for a living with who they are as a soul. And today, to help me with that mission, I'm super excited to have Sabine Gedeon. Hi Sabine, how are you?
Hi, Julie. I am doing well, thanks. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
I'm delighted. So uh, we have never met before, but I think we have a lot in common. And you've been a leadership and personal development expert, and you have a strong spiritual side to you and your work that you started to embody a lot more, from what I understand. So I'm excited to discuss all of this with you. And before we start, as usual, we're going to start with a 1-2 minutes grounding, and so that we're all mostly myself probably, in a better space, grounded to start this conversation. So for everyone, if you're not driving a vehicle or anything like this, just close your eyes and just press your feet on the ground for a moment, just to connect with the earth, connect with the floor, setting that intention to be connected with the earth, maybe even thanking the earth for allowing our existence on this plane. And then allowing your focus, your attention to come back all the way up into the chest, and in the middle of the chest into the heart. You can place a hand over your heart to connect with it, or just tune in to the sound of your heartbeats in your chest, or feel the sensations of your heartbeat in your chest. And then just visualizing or imagining as if your breath is flowing in and out directly through your heart. And just now breathing a little bit slower and a little bit deeper than usual. And we'll do this for about a minute together in silence. And one last deep breath. Before opening our eyes again. And welcome back. Welcome back, Sabine. Thank you so much for joining me today. So, as I said, you're a leadership and personal development expert, 20 years experience working with startups, leaders in startups and Fortune 500 companies. So, like, we got a lot to cover. But before we talk about your career, I would love to know what what's your spirituality look like? So what does it mean to you? Maybe what are your current perspective on spirituality? Has it changed over the years? I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And thank you again for having me. So I grew up Catholic, and I didn't even know what that meant. As I told you before, I was actually born in Haiti, migrated here to the U.S., and Catholicism is one of the major religions there. And so, I went through I think it's catechism, that's what it's called.
Mhm.
Like, went through the first communion and all that other stuff, and that was like my first introduction. I remember I used to have like this little book, or it's a Bible actually, but it was like this little tiny handheld Bible, that I would just randomly be reading, as a young kid, probably like 6 or 7 years old, right? And it was just fun for me. And so while we were Catholic, we went to church every Sunday religiously, did all the things, but life at home did not reflect anything like what we were being told, right? And so
Yeah.
as a kid, you start to question that. You're like, wait a minute, how come you're saying this, right? We should
Mhm.
live like this, but this is what's really happening. Um, then I got to a point where, like, for me, and this is not against Catholicism, but for me, what registered around who God was, or this higher power, was this judgmental, punishing being, right? And so it's very much like everything is a sin. Like, you need to be in that state of fear, because anything you do wrong, like, God will punish you. And I had that reflected back to me in what I call like my natural parents, right? And so I
Mhm.
just developed this avatar, not avatar, but like description of who God was and all the emotions behind that. And I got to a point actually when I was 25, and like I just been in a series of like really bad relationships, just got to a place where I was at the end of my rope. It was just from childhood, growing up, to college, to everything else. I felt like, you know what, if this is what life is, if this is the pain that life is going to give me for the next whatever number of years, a hard pass. I don't
Yeah.
want to be part of it, right?
Mhm.
And so for me at that time, I had decided that I didn't want to be here
Mhm.
anymore.
Okay.
And I devised a plan on how I was going to end it. And I share this, and I'm joking with it. And I know it's a very serious topic for some people, but the type A overachiever in me, like, I
Mhm.
planned it out. I cleaned my apartment at the time. I was living in Connecticut. I cleaned my apartment, got my paperwork ready. And it was just like, okay, so like when, whatever happened, when they found me, everything was ready. And
Yeah.
so the night before, I decided, all right, let me have a conversation with this quote unquote God, right? And so as I'm sitting there on my floor, yelling, screaming, um, letting out all of my emotions and all of my frustrations, once I did that, I finally got to a place where like I exhausted myself. And I was like, look, I'd be so willing to continue this life and endure this pain, if you will, if there was a purpose to it. If at the
Mhm.
very least I knew two things: one, that you were real, and two, that I had a purpose. And in that moment, Julie, every time I tell this story, I feel like I don't do it real justice. But in that moment, I felt the arms of God
Yeah.
wrap himself around me. And I just knew it. Like, no one had to tell me that that was what I was experiencing. I just knew that I knew that I knew that I knew that he was real. And so
Yeah.
I fell asleep in fetal position on the floor that night. And the next morning I woke up and I was just like, okay, so you're real. That
Mhm.
must mean I have a purpose.
Mhm.
And for me, it was just like, okay, my logical brain was like, okay, well, how do I figure out my purpose? It's like, well, let me go to the Bible, because I had some experience with that. I was just like, at the very least, I know that Jesus is said to be God in human form. Let me learn a little bit more about Jesus. And
Mhm.
so I literally started to, like, the four gospels, like, I'd be reading. I didn't understand much, but like I was reading for the understanding of who he was, what he said, what he did, like what all those things were. And then I found myself joining a church, And that church kind of helped me develop that relationship deeper. But what I also felt in that church was a very like religious, cultish like atmosphere. And
Mhm.
so, long story short, I found myself leaving that church just through different means. But when I left that church, there was such a part of me that I was like, oh, but if I leave the church, I at that point gotten so conditioned, like if I'm not part of the church, then what happens to my relationship with God, right? Because again, in my mind, the two were associated, right, with Christianity and religion and God. And really, me stepping out into entrepreneurship is what allowed me to build a relationship. Like, obviously, I've been building a relationship with God on my own individually, but I also had it on with the context of, but I had this institution, I had this religion behind me. But when I stepped into entrepreneurship, I was just like, all right, God, it's just me and you. It's just me and you. I'm not part of a church anymore. This entrepreneurship thing is really, really scary, really, really hard. And I know you nudged me to come out of here. And so over the last 6.5 years, it's been this journey, it's been this walk and on this path of me getting so much more deeper in my relationship with God. Not the God that I was like taught and trained and conditioned to believe is this mean judge who doesn't care, who doesn't love, and you know, you do the wrong thing and you're out of here, to really this infinite source of love, this infinite source of compassion, of goodness, of greatness. And then as I've gone through what I consider my awakening, it's the recognizing of, oh, he's not out there, he's in here.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of been my journey with spirituality over the last decade, or if
Oh,
not more than a decade, almost 2 decades.
okay. And I'm curious about, you said like entrepreneurship seemed to have like being like a transition, helping you transitioning from the church like practice to a more one-on-one, I'm tempted to say, like, a more personal, intimate practice or relationship. How did that happen? So like maybe tell us a little bit about what was your life before entrepreneurship, and like why was it a pivotal point both for your career and your spirituality?
Yeah, so while I was still in corporate, or let me take a step back. So
Mm.
I guess the dates would have been 2016, right? So this happened. The moment with God was like 2007-ish, 2007, 2008. Fast forward about 8 years later, here we are. I get this job opportunity. So I was still very heavily part of this church. I get this job opportunity and they offer to relocate me to Texas. I had 6 weeks notice, right? So literally my entire life, my entire comfort zone and bubble and daily routine completely disrupted.
Okay.
Well, when I brought it to the,
Sorry to interrupt. So where were you? What were you doing? And like, what type of job were you in?
yeah,
And so
yeah.
you,
So
yeah.
So I was in corporate America. My background is in,
Okay.
so I got a new opportunity with a global company to be part of their leadership development program for HR folks.
Okay.
And so the catalyst was when I brought it to the leadership of this church, they completely like it was persona non grata. Like they completely shut me out. You would have thought like I cursed at them or something. Like this opportunity to grow in my career, they saw it as, I don't even know how they saw it, so I won't assign an emotion, but literally they went on a slander fest, if you will, as a result of it. So here I am, right, right.
Doesn't even make sense
It
cognitively.
doesn't.
Like,
It
yeah.
doesn't.
Yeah.
So here I am. I knew that God had opened that door for me to take that job. So I was very confident in that. What I had been doing, and I think one of your guests said it before, she was like, stop outsourcing your knowing.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So what I had been doing up until that point is I everything I did, I sought them for confirmation. I sought them for affirmation. Like, oh, God speaks to them and then they tell me what God said, right? Or if I get an inkling that I thought I heard God or I thought I heard my intuition, I'm gonna run it by them because I didn't trust the voices that I didn't trust that God was speaking to me, even though inherently I knew that he was speaking to me.
Yeah.
So when this opportunity came and I brought it to them and their reaction was so negative, I went into the, oh, wait a minute, did I mishear God? Right? Like, I thought we've gotten to this place. And I got mad at God, really, essentially, just because I was just like, look, I prayed. I was like, God, please show them what you've shown me. Please tell them what you've told. And nothing changed. Nothing shifted. And I knew in that moment that I was at a crossroad, that I either had to trust, finally get to the place where I trust God, I trust what I'm hearing, I trust what I'm feeling, or I rely on other people for maybe not the rest of my life, but miss out on an opportunity because someone else didn't deem
Yeah.
because God didn't tell them, quote unquote. But anyways, so that was the major catalyst. So actually it was started before entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
because once I was in that leadership development program, it's 2 years. I was relocating every 2 years. Right. And so I didn't have a church home. I didn't
Mhm.
have like that. I didn't find that stability. And there was a point where I really wanted it. And
Mhm.
I just heard God said, like, no, 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 no. On this leg of the journey, it's just me and you. It's
Wow.
in you. And I'm glad, because when I was debating, or when I was feeling the tug to leave corporate America 2 years later, I didn't have anyone to, like, again, outsource my knowing. There was no one for me to seek affirmation from. And I remember this one time I was walking my dog, and I was like, God, like, I really want to do this entrepreneurship thing. And it would be easier for me to step out on a leap and do this if I at least had clients, if I had a
Mhm.
plan, if da 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 da. And then the voice I heard back said, well, that wouldn't be faith, would it? I was like, all right.
Oh my God, let it be a lesson for all of us.
Yeah.
Oh wow, not to, yeah, like not to need to have the plan, like the solutions all laid out before we make the decision. Wow, that's
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. So I took the leap. I took the
Yeah.
leap, trusting what I heard, trusting what I felt. And before I even took the leap, I just started praying for courage.
Mhm.
That just became my thing. Okay, well, I'm scared and I'm
Yeah.
gonna do this, but I need you to give me the courage. And that became the foundation that allowed me to gain the confidence to then say, all right, let me take this step. So to your point, the catalyst was actually leaving, or trusting in myself, or trusting what I heard, back in 2016, leaving my comfort zone, and then leaving my next level of comfort zone, which was my career. My career was so much my identity, my corporate career, I should say. It was so important to me to be this, like, powerful corporate leader. And when that got taken away, as you can imagine, it was like, okay, well, who am I?
Yeah. And I'm curious, so when, like, like, so in your spirituality at the time, it seemed like you needed somehow some sort of validation, but it somehow it doesn't sound like you were like that in your career. How was that in your like in your career? Did you experience the same sort of need of having like confirmations from other people? Because it somehow like it doesn't sound like it was.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think when it came to work, being an immigrant, I grew up with, well-meaning parents. It was all about work hard, work hard, work hard.
Yeah.
And in the household dynamics, because I did well in school and I was smart, like, I learned that that was my way of getting approval, right? Like, that was being smart, being the one to do things. Like, that's where I got my sense of approval, or my sense of love, and my sense of value. So that's why
Mhm.
when it came to corporate, even though I wasn't necessarily seeking value from, like, the leaders, if you will, but
Yeah.
being the first to go to college, like being the first to be in a boardroom, like being like, I was still feeding that part of me that wanted my parents to say good job, or I'm proud of you, or whatever else. It was still there. It just wasn't, as prevalent.
Yeah. And in that regard, going into entrepreneurship, was it also a leap of faith, detaching from what your family would have regarded as the valued thing or the good thing to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think funny enough, when I told them that I was leaving, these are my parents. When I told them I was leaving, like, first of all, the entire time I was in corporate, they didn't know what I did, right? So even though I'd be like, human resources, like, the people like who do they would be like, oh, okay. And then it'd get lost on them what I did. So they barely knew what I did. So when I said I was leaving corporate, I think between the two of them, they were kind of like, okay, well, you're smart, you'll figure it out, right? And
Okay.
that also goes to, a wound that I've had to that I've had to work through, right? And it's just this assumption because
Okay.
I've always just figured it out, you'll figure it out. So there was no like, don't do it, don't like stay back or anything. I didn't get that level of resistance from them. I also didn't get support.
Very neutral.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah. So it was just you and
God. Yeah, it's just
yeah,
me and God.
yeah.
And by far it's funny like when I think about and it's funny to even think about like who I am today and where I am in my spiritual journey and where I was then because just as passionate and as deeply in my knowing as I am right now I was then, but it was still so it was veiled. It was still very much veiled because I didn't have the awareness of this oneness, right? I still very much had this, all right, this is this outside entity who
Uh-huh.
is
Okay.
either permitting, not permitting, judging, right? Even though like I knew that it was a deep relationship, I still attributed a lot of like my natural parents way of parenting
Yeah.
or being or judging and whatnot
Mhm.
to um God. I call
Mhm.
my higher power God.
Okay. So you're at the stage where so you're deciding to take the leap of faith, but where did that attraction for entrepreneurship come from? Like, how did that, come about? Was it entrepreneurship for the sake of like entrepreneurship, or was it because entrepreneurship was gonna allow you to do better something that you really wanted to put out in the world?
Yeah, both actually. So I remember as 2011, I was working for this company and I had a manager who was a complete micromanager. And I remember
Mhm.
sitting in my cubicle like, oh my gosh, this cannot be life.
Mhm.
And so I had gotten a book, Laurel Langmeyer, The Millionaire Maker. It was the
Mhm.
first book that I ever ordered off of Amazon. Don't ask me why I ordered
Mhm.
it. But in that book, she was talking about how everyday people were taking skills that they had learned in corporate and started building these businesses and how they were able to leave. So at the time, I was doing recruiting, and so I was just like, oh, I can teach people their how to write their resumes. I can teach people how to do mock interviews and whatnot. And so I dabbled in that with friends and family, and then I realized quickly, like friends and family don't want to pay. And I can't sustain a lifestyle on this, and so I kind of put it down, and then I went and I prioritized my career, my corporate career. But there was always a part of me that would be like, dang, imagine if I could just I didn't know what the thing would be. Like there was nothing that was drawing me until this company that relocated me, and I was in this this state of being on my own and trying to figure things out. I had worked, so to kind of paint the picture. Coming into corporate, I did all the things, right? Took on all the dots. If you've never heard me talk about dots, they're development opportunities that suck. Um,
Ah!
I got that from one of my senior managers earlier in my career. I was doing all of the things. I went back, I got my master's, and it just felt like the more I worked, the harder I worked, the harder it felt like, that carrot, or I feel like that carrot kept moving, right? And so when I got this job opportunity, reason why I was so excited about it was I was able to quickly step into what I considered, a great role, which was the HR business partner role. And it is a great role, don't get me wrong. But I think the way that I romanticized what that role would be and what it would look like based on my earlier experiences, it wasn't that at this particular company in this culture. And it took 6 months of uprooting my entire life, right? For me to realize, wow, this is not what I want. And so it forced me to go within, right? And say, all right, God, like, I know you opened this door for me. I know this is the thing that I've wanted, right? I don't want this anymore. And I don't know what I want. And so I
Mhm.
asked myself two questions. When have I felt the most alive? And when have I felt the most impactful? And that was when I was sitting across from internal candidates, helping them kind of figure out what they wanted to be, and then reverse engineering that. And when I was behind closed doors with leaders, and I
Mhm.
got to see the human side of them, I got to see the vulnerability, I got to be like an inner person for them. And I was like, oh, wow, like this is really powerful. So that's what helped me say, okay, well, I've heard of this coaching thing, right? Like
Mhm.
coaching was around, but no one in my circle was talking about coaching. I was just like, I think that's where I'm being pulled to. And that's
Mhm.
when I started to make plans to like step out and be a career transition and leadership coach. So it was literally reaching to that point of this isn't what I want anymore, or I've grown this version of myself that wanted to go down this path. What next? So that's how entrepreneurship even came, just because I think the other thing too is I realized that, and I said this to you before, even though I clarified who I wanted to work with, how I wanted to do it, there was also this essence of me that said, all right, maybe as an entrepreneur, you can be the real you. You can be the whole you. Right. And I don't know why I had it in my head that I couldn't be that person while I was in corporate, but that's where my mindset was, that I was in HR. You have to show up a certain way. You have to be professional. You have to leave your emotions behind. You can't blur the lines. And so I use that, I'll call it, for lack of a better term, excuse of I'm in HR. I can't be Sabine, to not show up as myself, and saw entrepreneurship as a way of saying, okay, well, I don't have that. I don't have those confines anymore. And I can show up as myself 100%.
So maybe I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, but knowing what you know now, was it true that you couldn't have been Sabine while you were in HR? Or like for people who are currently in that situation where they're in a role and they think they can't be themselves fully, what would you say, like with that distance that you have with it now?
Yeah. Knowing what I know now, it's not true.
Okay.
Um, but also at the time, my identity was so wrapped up
Mhm.
in my career, right? My identity was so wrapped up in the identity that I had created of this professional dot dot dot,
Yeah.
that because that was my identity, the other part of me felt like it was a separate place. So I
Mhm.
think for anyone who is listening right now, the question is, how are you identifying? Right? Are you identifying as
Mhm.
Jane, Bob, Melissa, whatever? Are you identifying as, the senior VP of dot dot dot? Are you identifying as the employee of XYZ company? It
Mm.
really goes down to, where are you today? And if you ask the question, who are you? What's the first answer, right? Is it going to be your title? Is it going to be your role? Is it going to be the accolades or what you've done? Or is it going to be the human being behind all of that?
Yeah. And I also heard you at some stage say that, and I wonder, was it was it just now or was it before we started recording? I can't remember. But that somehow it also, while in entrepreneurship, still in entrepreneurship, it took you a little while to discover, to really get to being the real you.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, it's
so. How was that journey?
painful.
Okay.
Short answer,
Yeah.
painful. And
Mm.
the reason why is
Mhm.
when you're shifting, when you're elevating, or when you're, really truly coming into alignment with who you are, like, it's the thing that quote unquote made you you, that, like, it's almost like one day you're like, oh, okay, you're no longer black. Right? Like, what do you mean? Like, I've been black all my life. Like, what do you mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was literally a part of me, a huge part of me, that had to die. And it wasn't just the identity that I built around my corporate career that was dying. It was the identity, it was around the validation, right? Like, I had to question, who are you still seeking validation from? Are
Mm.
you really still living your life waiting for your parents to say, I'm proud of you? Right? Like, are you really still that little girl? And not from a judgmental place, because I definitely have self compassion, but I had to realize that there were elements of me or parts of me, versions of me that were still in operation and doing things and running the show, the paradigm,
Mm.
running the show, just so that little girl or that version of that little girl, that her value, her worth, her everything was wrapped up in what she did and what she could contribute versus who she was. Like all of that had to heal. All of that had to be restored, so to speak. So it
Mhm.
wasn't just the corporate, obviously it was the corporate identity that I was shedding, but like it was everything that created that corporate identity that I took into entrepreneurship. And as I transitioned through entrepreneurship, as I grew, developed myself, I started to look and see like, oh, wait a minute, you're building this business, but you're still building this business with the same programming
Mm.
that you did when you were in corporate. So if you want anything to look different, it doesn't matter. You could go back to corporate, you could go back anywhere, but until you deal with this programming, you're always going to be at the space of not feeling not enough, feeling like you have to do more, feeling like who you are isn't enough, and that there's no there's no impact that you're making, or you're not making it as big of an impact as you are.
Mm. I love what you're saying. Looking for the answer in the what you do is never gonna sort things out. My journey and my experience is that I could have changed what I do, like my job, a million times. I would never have been fulfilled. So sometimes when I hear people who want like, oh, I wonder, I need, to do, I don't really know what I want to do, but I want to do something different. You can do something different, but that's not where the problem is. And
Mhm.
so unless we start like, looking inside and daring to be ourselves and express the real us is like we're going to carry on the same problems everywhere we go, right? That's a great example because sometimes I see it in, okay, what different job would bring me more fulfillment? And here it was not about a different job. It was like a different paradigm. It's from employment to entrepreneurship, but it still took you a little while to get to the root of it. What do you think was the most instrumental or the most revealing for you to finally expose yourself fully or finally accepting and expressing yourself like the revealing Sabine, like even in entrepreneurship, how did that happen that people can maybe hold on to and replicate in their own lives?
Yeah, so we're both coaches. So this
Yeah,
is part plug for a coach.
yeah,
And this is also a really true story. So I ended up signing up with a coach. This was actually end of 2022. So Q4 of 2022.
mhm,
And I heard one of your other coaches, she had trained with Bob Proctor. So
yeah,
my coach had been one of his mentees for like 7 years, right? And so while I had always done personal development, I'm a big reader, whatnot. This kind of opened my door, like opened the doors to a whole new level of
mhm,
thinking and of being. And when I signed up with the coach, like he kept asking the same thing: "What do you want? What do you want? What do you want?" First, that was probably the first time, even though I've always been very like future focused, driven, like plans, I've always been doing it under the guise of what's expected of me, what will get that validation, right? But it forced me to kind of sit down and like, no, Sabine, what do you want? What
mm,
do you want? Like if I could wave a magic wand, and like I had never done that for
yeah,
myself to get really, really honest on what I wanted. And I started to dream big. Like, I want to do this. I want to be this. I want to do this. Right. And then I started noticing, then, you come down off the cloud
yeah,
and you notice the reality. Right. And I started paying attention. It's almost like I remember something else he showed me, but he was like, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
mm,
Right. And it was just like, once my eyes had been opened to bigger, greater, and coming from here, when I started to look at what I had been settling for a lack of better term, it was like, I'm like, even some of the clients, it was just like, oh my gosh, this is the same archetype. Like I'm just reliving the same archetype. Oh, I'm just attracting the same people. And I have this theory, this is all going a little off topic. I have this theory, and maybe someone already wrote a book about it, but I'm going to trademark it.
Yeah.
But we literally, until we get to the place where we start to heal, the same archetypes, if you will, the characters in our households
Yeah.
are the characters that we attract through our adolescence,
Yeah.
through university and college, in our corporate environment, and even when we're in businesses. And so I started to look at, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, I am still creating the same characters from my household. Like I could literally look at my clients, even though our interactions weren't the same, those were the same people because that's the cast of characters that I knew and I developed. I just remember sitting there. I had this business opportunity. This lady, she wanted to potentially bring me into her business as a partner.
Mhm.
And on the surface, it was lucrative. It sounded great. Like it would have been the thing the old Sabine would have jumped at, right?
Yeah.
But I started paying attention to the person, right? And no judgment on her. And I was just like, this is familiar.
Mhm.
This character, this archetype is familiar. And I decided then and there, I was just like, I don't want to relive this experience anymore. And so I turned down that opportunity. I didn't have other opportunities like on it wasn't like I had a full book of business and I was fine. Like that was actually a challenging decision to have to make. I cried, I bawled. I was just like, I don't know if I'm making the right decision,
Mhm.
but this is the decision that I feel led to. Like I put my livelihood on the line to make that decision. So that's like one of the catalysts between signing up with this coach, really embodying or really allowing myself to get clear on what I want and not what I expected others or others expected of me or that I thought would get others' attention, and then started to look at, okay, well, what's in your reality right now and what decisions do you need to make to align with who you want to be and what you want versus who you have been and what you have been doing.
That's super powerful because you know the way we say like we in personal development we're peeling the onion and like life goes in cycles. That's a huge interruption of a cycle to consciously purposefully say no to something that I'm guessing also must have felt familiar, so safe.
Mhm.
So like that's another leap of faith to get into the uncertain. And at that time, how was your conversation with God going on?
Um,
Did you get some did you get some help to make that decision?
that time I trusted,
Mhm.
but there was also a lot of fear, right?
Mm.
So it's just like I was coming at God with like, "Oh, you better send some other clients. This sucks," right? And I ended up going into that was actually the catalyst. I didn't even know it was a thing, Julie. I remember saying this to my friend, and she was like, "Oh, yeah, that's part of the process of awakening." I was just like, I had a period from making that decision. I experienced a few months of like what was like my lowest, like financially, my lowest emotionally, right? Like it spiraled me into this downward spiral, which was crazy because at the same time, I'm praying every day, I'm meditating every day, I'm trying to stand on faith every day, right? But literally, my life is unraveling. And I remember coming out the other side, right? I had one toe out the other side, and I was just like, it feels like I have been in the darkness of my soul for the last several months because it was just like, it, I don't, maybe someone has like described this, but it was just like that one decision
Yeah.
invited me. I'll use that word, invited me to go back and look at so many things. So here I am in this like emotional, spiritual, like roller coaster. It's like I opened, like, I don't even know how to describe it. And at the same time, I'm like, okay, this is dark. This is uncomfortable. I don't like this. I don't want to feel these feelings, right? But God, I know you're with me. Like, God, I know you're with me. I know you're with me. I know you're with me. So it was that I guess I had developed enough of the trust in
Mhm.
God to know that even though it felt dark, it felt alone, and I had to process all this stuff, that I was not doing it alone. And there was hope for me to get to the other side.
And what does the other side look like?
I would love to say that it is rainbows and butterflies.
Mhm.
It is
Yeah,
some days, don't get me wrong.
yeah.
But it's a confidence and it's a knowing
Mhm.
that one, I'm safe,
Mhm.
two, I'm loved,
Yeah,
three, I'm supported,
yeah,
and I'm cared for.
yeah,
And essentially, when I think about it now, when you look at you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of
yeah,
needs,
yeah.
right? Funny enough, I was listening to another podcast and someone mentioned, and I still have to research it, so don't quote me. When he originally created it, it wasn't a hierarchy. It was like phases, if you will, flat phases. Like everything was even, that we were going to cycle through them. So before I heard that on the podcast, I had come to the conclusion that the hierarchy is actually upside down. It should be upside down. So, it starts from your safety and secure, physiological safety, security, love and belonging, esteem, and then self-actualization, right? And so I think in my mind, and most of our minds when we're conditioned, it's like we're living life to go up the ladder.
Mhm.
Well, what I realized on the other side, that if we start at the top,
Mhm.
right? We start with our inner being. We start with that part. All of those other aspects of it, they get filled in, right? So from a biblical perspective, even though I don't consider myself Christian by any means, the Bible still is the reference source that I have for my spirituality. And it says, seek ye first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness, and all these things will be added onto you. When I first learned that, I was just like, oh, okay, well, I got to be this perfect person for God to bless me with the things that I need. On the other side of that, seek ye first the kingdom of God, the consciousness, the awareness that the kingdom is within you, right? Like focus on that, focus on your inner being, and all these outward things will be added onto you. So on the other side of that, I just have a different level of awareness of how to co-create and coexist in this life with God, how to be in flow. I would love to be one of those people who like thinks a thing and they manifest it immediately. I'm not there yet. But what I do know is that I have a level of power that I only thought could come through
Mhm.
status. I
Mhm.
only thought could come through how much money I had or whatever, enter XYZ. That no, it's this inherent power that I get to carry every day, and that I have a responsibility um, with that power to do good, within my community, within my clients, within my business.
But I've heard you say on your podcast, like, like I wrote it down because I thought it was beautifully said. Like, power is something that is internally sourced.
Yeah, yeah. And that series that comes from is I I don't know why, but like in the circle of like I was doing a lot of work with women, like everything was about, oh, empowered this, empowered that, empowered that. And something about the word empowered triggered me. I don't know why. And I'm like, okay, why aren't there any empowerment events for men? Why
Mm.
aren't men being empowered? Like, why are we the only ones having empowered events?
Yeah,
And
like
so
that's a very good
me
question. Yeah, yeah.
it just got me to thinking about the word power and how the conditioning, right? We've been conditioned away from wanting power, from feeling powerful. Like empowered almost gives the sense of someone is giving you permission.
Yeah.
to have power versus why can't you just be powerful?
Yeah. It's like someone is allowing you to be powerful.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's also as well the like, because you're listening to you, like the got me to think about all this power thing as well, because you bring up such good questions. Also the word like owning your power. Like
Mhm.
what's with owning? Like if owning is as in, okay, owning means you have it already, you possess it. So then if we possess it, so it's already here. So so how do you actually bring out what's already here instead of having that sensation of something that's outside that you need to grasp or that someone needs to give to you or hand over to you?
Yeah. Great question. So what I've what I've come to realize is doing that is the Women in Power series is that power one is a I don't want to use the word energy. Um Power is this and like it's this part of our state of being, right? So it's as innate as love,
Mm,
right? So we can all say, oh yeah, we have access to love, we are love, right? It's the same thing, we're power. And depending on your upbringing, right, power has a negative connotation or it could have a good connotation, whatever. But it's not just the power, it's all the elements with power, right? So I asked the question around authority, influence, right? There are so many other words that get translated with it. Control, right? Domination, all
mm,
of these things. So for individuals, when you think about power, right? Let's just say we're all powerful, right? Obviously, like we are literally the individualization of the source, right? Infinite intelligence, God, whatever you want to call it, right? So in and of itself, we're powerful, right? But in our day to day, maybe in our like when I was in my corporate career, right? When I was navigating corporate, I felt powerful. I felt really, really powerful because there was a level of control. I had a sense of, authority and influence and all these things, right? So in that space, I felt powerful. In my personal life, on the other hand, I didn't feel powerful. Did the power go somewhere? No,
yeah.
it didn't go anywhere. It was my sense of self
Mm,
that didn't allow me to see, to tap into that in that element of my life. Right. So, to answer your question, and hopefully I answer your question, that it's really about recognizing there are elements or there are spaces in your life where you have no question of
mm,
how powerful you are. Right. That's the place, those are the places where you're the most confident. Those are the places where you feel in control, if you will. Examine the places where you don't feel in control, where you don't feel confident, where you don't feel worthy. That's those are the places where you have consciously or maybe unconsciously
mm,
made the decision that you are giving up your power. Doesn't mean you don't have your power. You can choose at any moment. And that could look like speaking up for yourself.
mm,
That could mean setting better boundaries, saying no.
yeah.
That could be doing the work of realizing what is it that I really want. That could be assessing, who am I still seeking validation from?
Mm,
Who am I living this life for? Or who do I feel so responsible to that
yeah.
I won't allow me to give me what I need?
Mm. Oh, yeah, that's a powerful one. Yeah. Not having to rely on the external circumstances to provide for ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think there is a correlation with the areas where we are not, where we think we don't have as much power, and these are the same areas where we don't yet dare to be fully ourselves?
Mm. Yeah. Yes. And I think it's an indication of also where we need to heal, right? There's something there that we need to heal. There's something there that we're afraid of.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where we need to go and look inside.
Yeah.
And I'm just, I'm aware of the time, and I want to make sure that because I could talk for another 2 hours with you for sure. But you've been working with leaders for many years, and I see some books behind you. So I would love to know. What are they? And like, yeah, what's and in what ways you're supporting leaders now? How can people can reach out to you? Tell us more about what you do now and how people can contact you, get in
Yeah,
touch.
thank you for that. So my first book was Transformed: The Journey to Becoming.
Yeah.
And I'll just give you a quick backstory. Again, trusting intuition. I this is like my first year in entrepreneurship. Like I didn't have many clients, and I'm sitting there like, all right, God, I gotta do something. I gotta do something to market myself. And so I was just like, okay, I'm gonna write this book. And I'm
Yeah.
gonna write a book about my journey from corporate into entrepreneurship, so I can create a guide for people who are leaving, right? The things that I didn't know. I did the outline and everything. And then I heard this voice say, no, you need to write the other book. I was like, I'm sorry, I barely have this book. What other, what other book are you talking about?
Could you not tell me before I started that one? Yeah.
And it's just like, you need to write the other book about your story.
Oh.
And at the time, like, I was just like, I made my story so irrelevant. I was like, no one cares about that. But at the same time, I was like, all right, I'll be obedient and I'll listen. And so I started outlining, and basically it's a, I wouldn't call it a memoir, but it gives you an insider look of my journey, like my beginnings. I
Mm.
feel like there's a part of me that feels like I need to go back and revise it and rewrite it, like based on what I know today. But essentially, I leverage the metaphor of a caterpillar and
Yeah.
their journey of transformation. And I talk through about certain seasons of my life where, I was the caterpillar. So, like when I was in Connecticut and I was going to that church and I had my regular life, and then I was summoned, if you will, up to or in a different place, similar to what the caterpillar does. And what we really don't talk about as much in the growth space is what I like to call the messy middle. I didn't coin that, other people have coined that. But when you think about when between the between the caterpillar turning into the butterfly, there's a period of time where their entire DNA is just smush. Like they are just mush, right? They go into the cocoon, they're solid, and then everything is just decimated. And that's what happens in real life transformation for us. And that's where people get stuck. That's where people, start to like give up on their dreams. That's where people, go into the deep depression, or they go into the darkness of their souls and they don't ever come back out, right? And so I talk about kind of the progression of my life to coming into the butterfly. I also talk about, some abuse that I experienced in my childhood, like the things that formed who I became that needed to go into that cocoon to become this person. So that's what Transformed is. Leadership Reloaded is really, I did a podcast series talking to women about like, women in HR, in leadership, in L&D, learning and development, as well as DEI, kind of like what's the state of the workplace as it relates to women. At the time, there was, obviously there still is a huge gap in women, being at the higher levels in leadership within organizations, and really just kind of like decoupling that to figure out, well, why, what are their challenges, and knowing what I know about the workforce and how the workforce is shifting, like this identity of leadership. I feel more and more women need to start to embody it, regardless of whether they're sitting in a leadership role today, because there is going to come a time. There's a time now where leadership is so absent, pure leadership is so absent, that we need more women stepping into that identity and stepping into that place. And how it pans out, whether it's in corporate, government, whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter. But we can't sit around waiting to be empowered, waiting to be given a title or a level. Like it needs to start to come up. So that's what Leadership Reloaded is. And then Attributes of Ascent one is actually a anthology. So I wrote one chapter in there. That's like my spiritual side, and well, Christian mostly, but that I wrote it from the sense of my identity. And it really talks about the millennial generation and how I feel I'm a millennial, or they call it a geriatric millennial, but a millennial nonetheless. Uh,
Yeah.
and how, we're the ones, this generation is the one that's really like shifting the paradigm. Like we are right smack in between the old regime and the new regime, which is like Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and how we have a responsibility, if you will, to continue to plow and continue to open doors so that we can not push out the older generation, but to help create that bridge between older generation and newer generation. So those are the 3 books, and the way that I leverage, especially the Transformed, that that gave me the framework for my coaching. In the sense of when I first started, because I'm very like action oriented, I attract action oriented leaders. It was like, okay, well, what's the goal? What are the actions? You're going to drive through, and I'm going to be there as your accountability and your coach and your cheerleader, right? And then I would notice that, and not surprisingly, I would notice that they would get stuck in that messy middle, like the identity part of it. So if you think about, I started with the goal, the plan, and then a little bit of like identity, and then kind of like, here's how we're going to reinforce it. As I've gone through and written the book, gone through the process myself and worked with clients, I noticed that, no, we need to start with the plan. What do you want? Then we need to go into, who are you? Your identity, that self-building, that, I'm sorry, there's one more. There's the plan, what's the goal? Then there's the core values and identity, right? Who are you? What are your core values? Because what I've noticed is people will get really excited about a goal, right? And they'll start taking action. And then the minute they hit against their old paradigm, the minute they hit against their old conditioning, then they start to spiral, or they start to procrastinate, or they start to self-sabotage, right? So we're building a stronger foundation where the goal is not the thing. You start with the goal, but then you're also getting clear on, who are you? What are your core values? What are your non-negotiables? When things get hard, what are the values that you're going to use to anchor so that you remember, like, okay, this is who I am. This is why I'm doing this. Then we focus on the identity shift and really spend a lot of time in that identity shift, because for everyone, it looks different, right? It took years for me to, like, unravel the onion, as you said, of what was keeping me stuck and what those limiting beliefs were. Then we move into action. And then we have that, continued growth. And so that's how I've taken what I've written in Untransformed, in that journey of the butterfly, or the caterpillar turning into the butterfly, to actually supporting leaders in their transitions or transformations.
Yeah, so it's really like you're applying like be before do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
be do have. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so where can people listen to you, your podcast?
Absolutely. So the podcast is Leading with Power and Purpose, and you can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on my website as well. And then from a social media perspective, I hang out on LinkedIn and Instagram. Both handles are Sabine Gedeon, my full name.
Okay. Okay. So I still have like one, maybe two questions that
Yes.
are, if we have 5 more minutes. I know at some stage you said that, when you went into entrepreneurship, there was still a period of time where spiritually you had that personal relationship with God, but still seeing it a little bit as like the parent-child relationship. And I know it's not the case anymore. So like, how is it now? How do you, yeah, what does it look like now, your
Yeah.
intimate relationship with spirituality?
So if I can answer that question in a way, so when I don't know how I stumbled on this book. It was called I Am God, right? And like, there was a part of me that was like, don't read it, Sabine. But then there was a part of me like, no, read it. Because being in that Christian space, like everything is demonic, right? Like, like they just scare you into thinking like everything is demonic and whatnot. And so, but something pulled me to it. And when I was reading the book, like that's basically where she got to. She was just like, oh, we are God and all this other stuff, right? And the first time I read it, I was just like, this doesn't sit right. I don't know about this. And
Not
then
ready yet. Yeah.
huh?
Not ready yet.
Yeah, I was not ready yet. I was not ready yet. Then my coach recommended Neil Donald Walsh's Conversations with God. And I downloaded all 3 books. Like, if you know, it's like hours long, right? And I'm listening and I'm still like, I can't believe what I'm listening to right now. Like I can't. Oh, wait, what? Like it was just making so much sense, but it was so like it was triggering my old paradigm in so many ways. So I listened to it again, right? And
Wow.
just to kind of get to the place where I was like, I could start to believe, or not, maybe not even believe, but accept that
Mhm.
this could be true, that this could be true. And then I took back to, well, okay, what do I believe today? And I looked at all of the things and I was just like, oh my gosh, they coincide. It's been leading me here this entire time. So for a period of time, I felt like once I quote unquote, figured out, God and Jesus and Holy Spirit and whatnot, Holy Spirit was like my friend, right? Like Holy Spirit was in those darkest moments, I'd be like, here, Holy Spirit, I need you. Like that's how I connected to God in that moment. And when I got that revelation, there was a part of me that felt betrayed. It was like, oh my gosh, like you're not real. Like my deepest, most intimate things, like I turn to you, like you're not real. And so I had to go through that process, that it's not that it's not real, right? It's just that we've evolved the relationship. And so now my relationship is very much still the same. My like I wake up every morning in such a state of gratitude. I journal. I do a gratitude journal every single day. I am. I'm pretty sure there's still levels to this that I need to. I get to experience, but it's just the. I don't know. It's just pure joy. It's just pure joy every time. Like now that you ask that question, that's what's coming up for me. Pure joy, pure love, and I'm not looking for it in anyone else. I'm not looking for it outside of myself. I just know at any given moment, if I'm feeling low vibe, all right, God, do your thing. I need to feel your presence.
And from working with leaders in corporate, do you think now it's is the time, or is it now okay for people to be fully to express their spirituality, you think, fully? Like, is there a space now in corporate, do you think? Is it already happening? Is it at the start? Like, what's your perspective on this?
I think we need it more than ever now. And I think I'm personally coming into the state of awareness at the time that I'm coming into the state of awareness, as many other people are, because humanity needs this. And I think as much as the, pandemic gets slack, I always say this, that I think the pandemic is the best thing that could have happened to the world, particularly America, but the best thing because it gave people permission, or it forced people really to stop, to pause, to go within, to assess, like all the things that I talked about that like I've been able to do over a period of time, right? You were sitting at home for weeks. Like
Yeah,
you had nothing else to do but to
yeah,
sit with yourself and to sit in that discomfort, to look at the decisions that you've made and really to ask the question, is this the life that I want to live? And so you saw, as a result of that, people were leaving corporate America to pursue different things. People were deciding to shift careers. People left companies to go to different places because it didn't align. I think now more than ever, it's like the soil is ripe for us to seed more of this in those types of institutions, because the minds of the people have been cleared away of all of the junk, if you, for lack of a better term, that was previously there that would have crowded out any of
yeah.
this.
Well, that's like super positive and optimistic message, I think, to finish off. But before I let you go, is there one thing that I haven't asked you or that we haven't discussed that you want to share, that is on your heart to share, to as last concluding words for our
Yeah.
audience today?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I told you, when I was reading your LinkedIn bio, your about section, and I was reading and I was just like, oh my gosh, like she is talking to me. And what I appreciate the most, and especially for those of you who are listening, if you are in the corporate space, right? What gave me comfort, even now, I've been out of the space, was like, wow, there are others like me, right?
Mm,
There are others who are yearning to be, they talk about bring your full self to work, right? There were others yearning to be the fullness of themselves, the essence, to bring that to the table. And that gave me such peace and such calm and such joy. And so if you're sitting there and obviously if you're listening to this podcast, you're one of them, there are others like you, right? Not just the ones who have gone before, there are others sitting in cubicles or sitting in offices who are just like you. And I think like attracts like. Connect with other people who are like you, right? And don't be afraid. There's a verse in the Bible that says, we are the light of the world, right? I learned, I'll speak for myself. I thought that in that space I had to dim my light.
Mm.
I'm inviting you to shine bright and require them to put shades on if it's too bright, right? Let your
Love it.
light shine. That's what the world needs. That's why you're in that particular organization, you're in that particular department, is because your light is needed. And even though it may not feel like it's needed, it's appreciated or whatever, let your light shine. Because the Marianne Williamson says, when we let our light shine, we unconsciously give others permission to let their light shine as well.
Yeah. And that's leadership.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Without the title.
Without the title, yes, yeah. My God, I think they're beautiful words to, to finish this conversation, Sabine. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Julie.
you.
It's been
Yeah.
awesome. I could talk to you for hours too.
Yes, yes. I think, yes, we will talk for hours. I know that's coming for sure. But thank you so much. And thank you so much, everyone. So I will link all the ways that you can reach Sabine with this recording. So you'll have everything. And in the meantime, everyone take care of themselves. I love you. I love you all. And see you soon for the next conversation. Bye, everybody. Bye, Sabine. Thank you.